The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
For Tamariki, a bed isn't just a piece of furniture. It's a place to dream and grow. But 1 in 10 kids in our poorest communities don't have a bed of their own. Donate to Variety today to help give them a warm place to dream. Head to varietyWinterappeal.org.nz to show your support.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Nau mai, hoki mai ki other fold, e mihi nei, ko Duncan Greive toko ingoa. My guest today is Jennifer Cheuk, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of Rat World magazine. This is I love this conversation. Rat World is it's a print magazine. It only exists in that format. And she basically dreamed it up sort of mid-pandemic and willed the first issue into being as a way of representing the underground, is how she talks about it. So it's theatre, visual arts, music. Like it's basically the kind of K-Road scene. Is in my mind, that's how it feels, as if you could kind of bag that and put it into print. It's a beautiful product. It started out staple bound. It's now perfect bound. The most recent issue is 100 pages with, like, it just seethes with life and the kind of creative culture of an inner city that is kind of, I don't know, it just like refuses to die, and kind of a lot of what will go on to become the kind of cultural life of the country starts in places like this. That's just always true anywhere in the world, and certainly is true here. And yet, in the digital media era, and in an era where media in general is anyone listening to this podcast will know is really hard, there just haven't been natural spaces for that. And so basically Jen kind of willed this into being in part so that there would be a venue for both the practitioners and people who wanted to write and shoot and draw and find a way into those worlds could have somewhere to be and do all that. And you'll hear in this interview, she's just a really impressive, thoughtful, driven person. This is a extremely altruistic act. The writers get paid and she doesn't, and I don't know how sustainable that is. I was like, you got to keep something for yourself, but this is just an object. She wants to be in the world, and you can find copies along around the inner city of Auckland. You can also buy them online for $20. I strongly recommend picking up the most recent. It's just full. It feels like you're just bombing straight into a culture which maybe you're grazingly familiar, maybe you're in it, maybe you kind of have no idea about it, but either way, like you just are reminded of the properties of print, that curated, the sort of private communion that you have with it that just doesn't exist and can't exist in digital context. A really, really impressive person and product, and I really, really enjoyed talking about this. It brought me back to my own start in print. My first published words were in zines, and for many years I only wrote for print, and in some ways that was a lot of my kind of fondest memories of writing for that medium. I miss it a lot, and so it was super fun to talk to Jen about it. So this is Jenn Cheuk, founder and editor-in-chief of Rat World magazine, on the fold. Kia ora, Jen. Welcome to the fold.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited, because I come from print. That's my origin story. So, I always kind of keep an eye out for people kind of flying the flame. But with Rat World, it's beautiful because it's not something that's continuing. It's something that's been brought into the world relatively recently. What possessed you, a young person and seemingly possessed of all their faculties, to start a print magazine during the pandemic?
Yeah. Well, I think I've always been really interested in print as a form, and I've been kind of collecting magazines and zines since I was very, very young. And I think that form of so much being in one publication is really exciting to me. And when I started this in 2022, I was kind of struggling to break into the art scene, and a lot of people that I knew were also kind of saying the same thing, where it felt like publishing was a really exclusive space and there were a lot of people doing amazing things, and they seemed to kind of hit a bit of a glass wall, and it was we didn't know the right people or didn't know how to make connections in the right way. And I kind of thought, why don't we just start something and just make it, and it can be open and kind of for everyone. And I think that sort of form of connecting with a piece of publication was really interesting to me.
So, I mean, why? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit there, but why print as the vehicle for that? Because there are, typically people would suggest like a Substack or a TikTok account. Like, there's so many different ways you can do it now. But you chose print very deliberately.
I think print is incredibly validating for a lot of artists, and it's something that you can hold on to and bring home to your parents or your family and say, I was published in this form. And whether you agree with it or not, it is something that validates your work as a writer or an artist, and that can be really great for emerging artists on their CV and to really help people start to get ahead in this scene. I think also I was really interested in trying to create something that was almost anti-algorithm in a way. I think during the pandemic, we started to see the rise of TikTok algorithms creating a form of content that was what you liked and what you wanted to see. And therefore it kept siphoning you into just the same things, into this echo chamber of things that you've seen and will always see and will continue to see. And I think with something like a magazine or an anthology, it challenges what you think you like. You get to see different work all the time. And, I think you have to move through the pages and the different content to find something you like. And therefore you're seeing all this other breadth of work that you could like, which I think is really great for opening your eyes on the different sorts of work that's happening across Aotearoa.
I mean, I totally agree. And that notion of curation as being something that we've, on some level, decided in many contexts is defunct, that we're much better off letting that be code than letting it be a person.
Yeah.
In terms of that, the sort of subtitle, it's a magazine for the underground.
Yeah.
Sort of define underground and why did you sort of pick that as the kind of the focus?
Yeah. I think underground is such a broad term and kind of a play on this concept of rats and rat world in a way. But for me, it's kind of the emerging BIPOC, queer, underrepresented voices who don't always get to have a space, particularly in publication. I think it's definitely improving a lot these days, but there are still a lot of barriers to publishing your work in a physical space. And I think this notion of underground was just interesting to me because I think it's people that don't necessarily get seen, but there's still a sense of community in underground. Rats have a community together. And I really liked that there was that connection as well. But yeah. I hope that kind of answers your question.
I think it does. Let's talk about rats. You've chosen a name that doesn't. It's confronting. It's non-traditional. What were you trying to get at with Rat World?
Look, I feel like this is a disappointing answer for everyone who asks me this, but Rat World came to me in the middle of the night, and I thought this is what it has to be called. So that's where the phrase actually came from, and I think. I always have this notion of rats in my head as running around with the suits and the briefcases, and they're just doing things and existing as they are, and they're like anthropomorphic cartoon rat speaks to me on this level about, I can just see them holding a newspaper or a magazine and they feel like they exist, whatever. They exist in cities, they exist in every space, whether you like it or not, we are there. And I think that's what's really cool about rats and Rat World, I guess. Someone did point out to me that RAT was an acronym for art, which I thought was quite funny.
That's true.
Oh, not acronym, where you can move the letters around.
Anagram.
Anagram for art. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So I'm going to pretend that was deliberate. But
It works.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that's interesting to me is like you know, the name and the notion of it being for the underground and the sort of locus of it feels very K-Road of the kind of era that I grew up in, like sort of 20 years ago. And, you know, and naturally you kind of age out of that and and it feels like this kind of window, not in a kind of bad way, it's just it's not for you anymore.
Totally.
But I do feel like that culture, which is kind of both fragile and feels kind of deathless at the same time, you know, has felt as present in a kind of, or you know, in mainstream culture anymore. Like, what is the kind of state of the underground, and is it in part of the mission of it to kind of revive that idea of it? If it has a place and it needs to be kind of noted and you know, kind of set down.
yeah, I actually think we have a really flourishing underground literary and art scene. You know, I think of things like Zine Fest now in the Auckland Art Gallery has 2 levels of vendors at the moment. And we have things like Auntie's House and All My Friends and all of these platforms that are for, you know, underground artists and people who haven't been able to show their work in a safe and kind of really welcoming space. And I think that so many, you know, you've got Bad Apple Gay and you've got all of these really phenomenal literary spaces cropping up. And it's, in a way, it is saying, you know, we needed to make this for ourselves and we are here. And there is something, of course, exhausting about that, to do that constantly for yourself. But at the same time, it's building a space for artists and by artists, I guess, which I think is really special. I don't think that it is going away or has actually diminished in any way or form. I think it's really flourishing, which is amazing.
Yeah. Do like on some level selecting print as well and you alluded to it earlier in terms of that you know, the comments about the algorithm. You know, what is your own relationship to sort of social media and algorithmically driven spaces, and what is there a kind of give a bit of a general thesis of how the underground views that world? I
think oftentimes we see social media as a vehicle to bring people together in the real world. So I think the obsession with, I guess, numbers and stats in the digital space is not as prominent anymore. It's about putting something out there in order for people to then come together in a physical space together. And I see that like material forms such as posters are still really huge, right? And I think social media is just another form of storytelling and narrative in that same way. And the way that I use it for Rat World as well is just getting people's work out there in another space, but to also bring people together in this physical space with the publication, with launch parties, with each other. So, yeah, I think it's interesting to see it as something to play with, but not something to dwell on, I think.
Do you, I mean, so you started it in
2022.
And, you know, like, did you, you know, I'm holding issue 7 here, and we're now like more than 2 years on from that. Did you kind of see that it would persist and kind of evolve in the way that it has?
Absolutely not. I actually brought issue 1 here, if you wanted to have a look at it, because it's
so
different. It's so our latest issues are a perfect bind, which means it's got kind of the square bind at the end, but our first 2 issues were saddle stitch, which is more like a traditional zine with staples down the side. And I had no plans for this, actually. When I released issue 1, I didn't know what would happen with it or where it would go, and I was kind of just going off of the energy that the launch party had for that one and the community that started to form around it. And I was a bit like, oh, well, there's people reaching out wanting to platform things in issue 2. Well, I can't stop now. There's an issue 2 already kind of coming. So, okay, let's keep doing that. And, you know, there is a spontaneity, I think, that exists even in issue 7 for Rat World, and a DIY-ness as well. And I think I didn't plan for it to get to where it is now, but I think that that's kind of part of the ethos of Rat World as well, is I get to almost be flexible and move with what's happening in the scene and where things are going and talk to people and not plan so far ahead that it's out of date by the time it comes out, I guess.
So you self-funded it initially, and what does the sort of business side of it look like? I mean, do you consider it a business? Would you like to kind of see it kind of grow in scope?
So we were very lucky to I had enough savings in the bank to be able to self-fund issue 1, and then all of the other issues have broken even to be able to fund the next issue now. We are a 2-person team, essentially, myself and a graphic designer. We don't get paid for this. We pay the artists first and foremost, and everything else goes to the printing of this work, and everyone knows that printing costs a lot. But I think in terms of a business model, as long as it's breaking even in order for me to pay artists and pay for the printing, I'm okay with that. Obviously, I would love to pay the artists more, and that's what I'm trying to kind of work up to. That's the next step, I guess, in the business plan, so to speak. But I don't see this as a business. I guess I see it more as a platform, if that makes sense. I think I don't see it as a business because I'm not trying to grow it in the same way that I think a business would be trying to grow at this stage. I really just hope it keeps going for the time that it needs to keep going.
Are there some, whether it's stories, things that have flowed out of it, like pick a couple of moments that have come along as a result of publishing that have felt sort of validating, and like you could sort of see that the dream of the idea was actually starting to be crystallized?
I think that when people find collaborations with each other just from meeting up at launch parties or from being in the same issue, I think that's so amazing. And there are things like I interviewed a musician, Jeff Chen, who's in Good Space in issue 2, and then just yesterday we were meeting up to discuss a art project, an installation project that he wants to do, and he wanted some help with that. And I think those sorts of conversations that even over like the past year and a half, they've still been there, and those connections have still been there, which is really phenomenal. And I think people who've messaged or emailed me and said that they've managed to get published beyond this, or this was a really great launch pad, is always really great, because that's what this kind of started out as, is for people that needed that kind of extra step in some way, that it was hard to break into the exclusive space of publishing, and this was a really great way to do that. Or I think, I also think interviewing people in a way that is about something maybe they haven't talked about before. When I interviewed Hannah Tusker Poland, we were talking about things that she mentioned to me afterwards that she didn't feel like she could talk about in other magazines. So talking about things like burnout and sustainable artist practice and things like that. So I think this being a platform for perhaps more on-the-nose conversations as well about what it means to be an artist and how you create and practice, but also for people to connect and to collaborate later on and to find space in the community to actually work together. That's really important, and that's something that I was hoping for this as well. I was really aware that it's just difficult sometimes to make connections with each other, especially as artists. And these launch parties, I see people talk and they haven't met each other before, and I think, these people are going to get on. That's amazing. They're going to probably make something together in the future, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, well, that's the function of them, right? It's interesting what you say about conversations that can be had, and that's another thing about print, is that there's a lot of kind of bad faith reading, to this my perception, that goes on in through social, because the incentives are there to kind of grab something out of context and blow it up. But that's the beautiful thing about print, is that can happen, but it's just an extra step, and most people won't take it.
I also think you have to take more time to engage with a published text, and I can't flick between tabs, for an example, and distract myself when I'm reading in a published text. It's you know the way that it's going to flow from page to page, and you can read it. Like, there's constraints, I think, when it comes to reading in a print form that doesn't happen online. And I think that inability to distract yourself as much means that you have to pay attention to what you're reading and then really engage with it as a piece of art in a form, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of how it's constructed, like you've got comics, you've got visual art, you've got these long form interviews, photography. It feels like you're really trying to kind of stretch and make a big tent in terms of contributors. Why that decision?
It's really funny because when we were first starting to publish this, the main question we got was, who is this for and why is it so broad? There's so much stuff in it. And I think these days it's really important to have breadth of work, and I think we see so much within a particular niche, and I think particularly with social media and the kind of algorithmic curation, it's niching it down to a smaller and smaller box of kind of hashtag and trying to force something into the smallest possible identification markers that it can be, this piece of art and then oil painting and then surrealist oil painting and such and such. But I think what's great about kind of the breadth of magazines and anthologies as well as you get to engage with so many different sorts of works and change your viewpoints on things and see especially I think in New Zealand as well, seeing how much amazing work is coming out of our landscape that we may not know about. And I think it's important to showcase that literature and publishing is for a range of narrative and a range of different art forms. It's always been really important for me to put things like comics, animation, and any of these sort of multimedia narratives in Rat World, because I think those are things that are often left out of publishing spaces, but they can be a part of them. And there's just so much to play with print publishing that I think we don't often think about because we have this kind of, digital space that we think that everything could be on there. What was your question? I got really wrapped up in thinking about like form for a second.
No, it was about form. It was about the breadth of, and I suppose you've nodded at the depth of form as well, because that there is just a general kind of narrowing, and that's what I really appreciated about it, was just this sense of most magazines start as fundamentally they're about businesses. They often come with and understandably a conception of, okay, well, how must we pay for this? And that becomes, a lot of other things get led by that. But I think, as you say, your conception of it as a platform means that it has a really different feel as a result.
Yeah, I think also if I'm thinking about things like wanting to have a breadth of voices and stories being platformed in this sort of thing, you also need to be open to the breadth of styles of telling stories and narrative. And I think getting away from the narrowness of maybe a Western conception of what storytelling is and saying, well, there are other ways that we can tell narrative and other ways that it's important to think about showcasing creativity and self. And I think that's really important.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora, this is Toby Manhire, here to urge you to tune in to Gone by Lunchtime, a podcast with me, Annabelle Lee Mather and Ben Thomas, tackling the world of New Zealand politics, from policy to polling, from scandal to psychodrama. Listen to Gone by Lunchtime, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network, wherever good pods are sold.
So the latest issue is called Queer Takeover. Mm-hmm. It's guest edited by former Metro food editor Jenn Cheuk. How did you kind of get connected to her? And tell me about this issue, which feels like not a breakthrough, but it's like a very sort of themed kind of. It's potentially a bit more ambitious than a sort of a regular run. Yeah.
So this is our very first themed issue. So it is definitely a depart from what we usually do. And Nathan Joe from Auckland Pride reached out to us and was really keen for. It first started out as this reviewing project called Pride Reflect, which was posted on our online platform, which is our reviewing platform. And what we did was worked with Nathan Joe to archive and review some of the theatre and performance and music pieces as part of Auckland Pride this year. The reasoning behind that was that so much of these events are fleeting, and once they've been experienced, there's kind of no history or archiving of the experience or how it contributed to a larger landscape. And so we initially published it online, and then Nathan kind of had this idea of, would you want to actually platform this in an actual physical form, and thinking about how we could talk about not only the Auckland Pride 2024, but also kind of queer creativity in an tangible archived piece. And I thought this would be just a fantastic issue, I think, because we could really showcase this, like I said, the breadth of kind of creativity across Aotearoa, which I think is really great, to showcase everything from music to comics to indie publishing. And I think that was really exciting. And Nathan got us connected with Jean, and from there kind of the ball started rolling. And I feel so grateful to have worked with Jean and Nathan as guest editors, because they brought a new perspective into things. And I think it's really important to work with people like that, so that you can challenge your own biases and your own perspectives. And I think from an editorial perspective, it's important to know where you come from and where your preconceived ideas come from, what your interests and your biases come from, and then to challenge them with conversations and kind of collaborations with people. So this was a really exciting issue to have. And it's hefty. It's like 100 pages, so I'm very stoked.
It's a solid piece. Do you, in terms of the financial side of it, like that, there's starting to be like advertising within it. Do you want to talk about the whether it's institutions or businesses or whatever that have seen it and supported it?
Yeah, so we have started incorporating ads in the last couple of issues, and half of them were people who reached out to us, and the other half were us reaching out to particular businesses that we wanted to support or particular events that we wanted to support. I think the main thing is that we're always wanting to platform advertising that I think is in line with the ethos of Rat World. So, independent businesses, but also, events such as, I think we did an advert for the K-Road Halloween event last year. And I think as this platform starts to grow, I'm conscious of what people need to be seen and what kind of businesses or projects need to be seen as well. So that's kind of my thinking when it comes to advertising. Yeah. And
in terms of, I just wanted to take a quick detour into a couple of other sort of elements of your kind of creative life. You've finished up at Writers' Festival, but before then, do you want to just talk about your role and the work you did on the most recent edition?
Yeah, so I was the program manager for the Auckland Writers' Festival, and I curated a bunch of events for the general program, and I was in charge of Streetside at Britomart, which is kind of the free fringe-style pop-up event at Britomart in the evening, which was really, really fun. And my kind of driving force, let's call it that, my driving force with curating these sorts of events was trying to bring to the foreground alternative forms of publishing, things like translated pieces, zine making, comics, all of these things that I think that aren't often a part of writers' festivals and don't get really seen as part of writing. So I think I'm always kind of challenging what is writing and what does it mean to be a writer, and to really step away from this traditional conception we have in our head of what writing and writers are. So that was really exciting. I
should have asked this at the start, but it's sort of leaping out now. Is how did you get to be so? Like what was your journey to this place where you were you're so interested in all of these kind of conceptual elements of what writing is? Because it's not a lot of people like you.
Really?
No, disappointingly.
Okay. Well, that means I've been talking a lot about form to a lot of people that might not have been very interested. But I think I always go back to when this sounds kind of funny, but when I was 4 years old, I wrote this little story called the Dragon Who Lost His Parents, and I was obsessed with trying to get it published in a print form, and I forced my older brother to kind of print out all the pages and stitch it and make it look like a book, because it had to look like a book. And I think I did that for a long time as a child as well, and I think there's always been something really, really exciting to me about holding something that you've written or holding something that someone else has written and knowing the effort that has gone into kind of building this material, the ink on the page, the font choice, the spacing, everything is so it's so kind of mathematical as well. There's a formula to what someone has put into this work, and it's like an art form, and that's really exciting to me. How I got to where I am today, I actually have absolutely no clue. So I actually started off in theatre reviewing, and I think theatre reviewing is really, and I still kind of do it today, it's interesting to me because it's about experience and it's about ephemeral form as well, and the construction of a space and activating a space into a piece of story or a piece of work, and that's really exciting, and I actually see it as quite similar to publishing, because this is experience as well, and this is space making. It's taking up space in the real world in the same way that theatre does. It takes up physical space. You know, you can hear the actor breathing and you can see them, and I think in the same way I can see text and I can feel page, and those experiences feel linked to me. So I think they kind of went hand in hand as I started to move into the creative scene. But I think I'm always just interested in unconventional spaces where stories can exist. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it really does. It really does. It's honestly, it's transporting me back to when I started writing, and that sense of, because I wrote about live music. That was
cool.
For years, and it was very much the same. Yeah, obviously related in some respects, and I remember the feeling of desperate to get into this world and don't know how.
Yeah.
And B, that sense of you know, like you've got so much tactile stuff to use, and then that if you don't do it, it just goes and it's forgotten kind of thing.
Totally.
And also, like, when I first started editing magazines, there was this that sense of just being desperate to find and make space for new voices. Because I remember you remember your own experience of being like, how do I get in here? Like
100%. I think it's interesting about reviewing as well, because you're trying to get into a scene, but you're unintentionally on the sidelines constantly as a reviewer, and I think that almost helps in a way, because you start to see the piece from a spectator or third-person perspective, and you get to really investigate what is this work,
But it's also kind of prickly, right? Because you're sort of reviewing. I found that I had to keep. There's a weird thing where you're like right next to, and you end up knowing the practitioners, but you also need to be able to say, "Hey, this thing kind of sucked sometimes," or variations on that, maybe more politely. I certainly regret not being more polite, but I guess that kind of. I feel like that's a thing that my sense is that it's not practiced enough or as much as it was 20 years or so ago, and so what is your kind of sense of the current health of the kind of critic, even the nature of the critic, and where the line is drawn is really different now?
I think that I have never considered myself a critic, and I do consider myself a reviewer, which to me is I am not passing judgment on the quality of someone's work, and I don't ever assume that I have the expertise to as well. I think what's important for me with reviewing is noticing if something isn't hitting and explaining why it might not be hitting, and thinking about how an artist or a practitioner can alleviate that or to fix that. Is it something to do with, I try to think of what the vision is and why is it not transforming into that vision, I guess. So I see works in which people are trying to be really experimental with lighting and sound, and perhaps the beats aren't quite on. And it's about saying, this is a really exciting dream to have, but it's perhaps about thinking about the ways we can refresh this space and think about being a little bit more rigorous in that space. And in that way, I think reviewing is important, especially I review a lot of emerging works. I really don't...
You got to be very different and
careful. I really don't want to put someone down on a dream or a hope or a beautiful idea that they're showcasing to an audience, and that's incredibly vulnerable. And I really respect and I'm grateful to be in that space to see this work. So I think it's about how can I use this reviewing platform and practice to help to scaffold a next level for this artist. As a viewer, what am I seeing that is not making me feel like I'm enjoying this piece, and why is that? Rather than saying this sucked, because nothing ever really does suck in my kind of perspective. I'm thinking, what were they trying to do and why didn't it work right now? And I think that's how I kind of alleviate that tension between, critiquing and trying to uphold space for new artists.
Yeah. Well, I think when you're operating in that area, there's a whole different reality. Lastly, you've also just released this. You're busy. Everything that moves through another, an anthology of mixed heritage creators across Aotearoa. Tell me about that and how it came to be.
So this was a little bit more of a personal journey than Ratwood, because I myself am mixed Hong Kong Chinese, and I feel like a lot of the mixed heritage creatives I talk to feel like they have to choose a particular space to exist in, whether that be a particular identity, language, culture. And I thought there really needs to be a space for us to investigate and explore identity in a way that we need to and we want to. And what was really exciting about this publication is we gave heaps of time and space to just play and explore creatively, and to see what form and someone's art took, or whether they wanted to write a poem or a painted piece, and to just really see what needed to happen when it came to exploring identity in a really open space. And that's why there's so much. I mean, if you thought that Rat World had a lot of breadth, I mean, this one's 200 pages of paintings, photography, multimedia, poetry, essays, and kind of everything in between. And I think it was really important for this to have breadth, because there were so many different languages and cultures and backgrounds being explored that you can't force someone to write their story in a particular style or form if that's not the way their story needs to be told. And it was, I worked on this with Damien Levi and Eric Soakai, who helped on the editorial team, and 5EVER published it, which was awesome to be done with an independent publisher, because we got to... So it's all printed and glued and bound by hand, each book. So that's a really beautiful, offering.
It's a gorgeous product. Like this is special. Do you view it as the start of a series, or is it just like? I mean, it's a hard thing to say when you're just kind of getting over the exhaustion of willing it into being.
I think that it can have a life as a further archival space. That's all I'll say for now, mostly because I feel like I need a small break before I start thinking of other projects. I'm trying to start saying no to things, which is very difficult as a freelance artist, because you're always terrified that this will be the last opportunity you will ever have, ever. So, yes, I'm trying to get over the fact that I've just put out several projects and I need a little bit of a break.
Honestly, with your industriousness and vision, there is zero chance that it's your last project ever. Thank you so much for coming on the fold today, Jen. I've really enjoyed this.
It was really great to chat with you.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Greive, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.